Yeah, it worked. All right, we are live, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Lake County. I'm your host, David Rich. Have a first-time guest on, Anthony Vega, who is the Lake County Clerk. Hello, Anthony. How are you, sir?
I am great. Thank you for having me on. Good to see you, David and David.
This is the David and David Let's Talk Lake County show tonight. So David Weinstein's a good friend of mine, and I had reached out on Facebook about having co-hosts on, and he was the first one to raise his hand. So how about next Tuesday with Anthony Vega? And he's like, sure. So here we are. What's up, Dave?
It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah,
Even though I was getting my butt kicked in court all day, but that's okay.
Oh, that's always fun. Okay. Maybe we can have you on just to talk about what it means to be a Lake County lawyer. Anyway, so Anthony is the Lake County Clerk. Okay, not to be confused with Erin, David's wife's role as Lake County Circuit Court Clerk, which is way too many words and too many C's. I don't like it. I trip up when I have to say that, but I think I got it now. Anyway, very distinct operations in the county level governments. Just to put in perspective, Erin is kind of like the countywide filer of things, and we lost David. And Anthony is going to tell us what the clerk office does. So go ahead.
Yeah, look, David. Similar, Erin and I are similar. She is the custodian of all court records for the 19th Judicial Circuit. I'm the custodian of everything else. I am the custodian of birth, marriage, death records, land records. For the viewers that may not know, the Recorder of Deeds office was eliminated, and those functions absorbed by the county clerk. So that's something that I'm responsible for. We have a role with in the taxing process. We calculate the tax rates for the taxing districts, and the most
So you real quick. So you got a real tight association with Erin's office and Holly's.
Yep,
and with the birth and death certificate, because it's with the coroner's office too, with Jennifer.
Yep. So
You're kind of the central office to all these. Okay, cool. I didn't know that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and obviously the most public function of my office is we're in charge of elections. I'm the chief election authority for the county of Lake. So whether you vote in person during early voting or on election day or via mail, you come across my staff, my teams of election judges. And so we have a total of 54 staff, and we're responsible for it all.
54 staff and responsible for all of it. That's a lot of ins and outs day to day.
And I should say that I actually forgot one of the most important statutory functions is that I'm the clerk to the county board. So I have to, take the minutes. I do the roll call. I am present at the county board meetings as the official record keeper. And I do apologize. My dogs are walking around.
That is okay. So that's coming from you.
Yes.
Are you still with us? Dave's video has gone away. Dave, you still there? Yeah. Okay. That's extremely cool. It seems like an awful daunting task there. That's a lot of stuff.
It is, but it's people think, right, it's not, the county clerk is not sexy, it's not attractive. You're not a state senator, you're not a state rep, you're not a county board member, where you can have your bunch of photo ops or talk about issues that but it's an administrative office. It's a critical office. People don't know how much they rely on my office until they have to get something from my office. And so, we are there to make sure that people are able to get their marriage license, they're able to get their copies of their birth and death record, which we have seen what happens when you reduce access to those types of services in other states, for example, and how that impacts people's livelihoods in many different ways. And there he is, he's back.
Technical difficulty there, sorry.
So Anthony's just kind of giving us the fill in on what the clerk office does. I'm David. I'm sure you're privy to most of this. There's some things he said I didn't know about. It seems like it's such essentially like a hub for the other offices, because all these records go from the other offices, which is very, very intense stuff. It seems like a lot of stuff to do.
I know you do all the marriage license and the wedding license, and if you need a notary, you go in there. There's all kinds of stuff. So
Yeah, for that notary service is something extra that we do. We do it for free for people. People can
It's
come
for
in and
free. That's great.
yeah, for free. You can go to the library, you can go to a bank, right? You can go to a currency exchange. But if you're in the building doing official county business and you need a notary, you can always come over to my staff, and we'll be more than happy to notarize your documents for you.
That's really good to know, because I know that there are some private notarizers out there who will like charge you like $50 to go and sign their name. So okay. So that's good to know it's offered for free somewhere. Okay, very cool. So talk about like why did you choose this office instead of something else when you were started campaigning?
Look, first of all, not many people know this, but I was a high school student election judge. So I've been involved in elections, for a very long time. And, so I worked 2 elections when I was in high school, my junior, senior year. I went away to college, came back, and I was in grad school, and I signed up to be an election site coordinator, just kind of like a higher level election judge worker for the Chicago Board of Elections during the 2016 primary. So I saw that other side of elections. And obviously I do a lot of my dog.
You both have dogs.
Here. Yeah.
My dogs are being really good. I'm surprised.
Yeah, I don't hear
because they knew that my dogs were not going to be good. And so they wanted to, my dogs wanted to embarrass me right now.
They wanted to keep the balance in the universe here.
Yeah, but anyway, and I've been involved, and even when I came to Lake County because of my job at the time, which was in advocacy, I volunteered to be a poll watcher to make sure people's rights were, people were able, who are eligible voters were able to cast their ballot. And I did that for every election until I was appointed chief of staff to the Lake County Sheriff, and that was my first government job. And so I've always been interested in elections, fascinated by elections. I'm a first generation. My parents are immigrants. I've always voted because my parents never could, right? They're still my mom is still in the process of becoming a citizen. So I vote for those family members that can't, for those neighbors that can't. And at the time, we had a lot of issues in the county clerk's office. We had a lawsuit against my predecessor from 2 staff members who blew the whistle on some things. We had the 2020 election, and I saw firsthand what happens when you don't have a plan to count the massive amount of vote by mail ballots that were being returned, because during 2020 people were not going to the polls. They chose to vote. In the office, if my number is correct, the office sent out over 125,000 vote by mail ballots in the 2020 general election alone. And so when you're having these multitude of issues, that's really when I started to really think this office is super important, and we need to make sure we have somebody that has a strong leadership, that's able to safeguard our elections, that's able to be a really good administrator in that role. And I was actually determined to support another candidate. I was like, whoever's going to run, this is a key office. And until someone during dinner at one point said, well, if you care that much about it, why don't you do it? And then that kind of started, the conversation. It
almost sounds like a taunt.
Yeah. That's how it went down. I started thinking more about it. Actually, that night, I didn't go to sleep till 7 a.m. because the whole night I was thinking about it. And so then I was looking at numbers. I was looking at Erin's, how she performed her first time as a candidate, how much money she raised. I looked at the other countywides. I started, and I was thinking a lot about it. I had to obviously talk to my husband about it to make sure he was okay with it. And then, weeks went on, and Mary Ellen Vanderventer, who was a recorder at the time, was supposed to be running against my county clerk predecessor. And then she pulled out, and she said, I'm not going to run. So it was completely, it's almost an open seat. And so then I decided to go for it. I started having conversations with other sitting elected officials about why this office is important. And so I declared my candidacy. as a primary, as a Democratic primary to a then Democratic incumbent, because my predecessor was elected as a Democrat. And when I announced and usually in primaries, when you're primarying the incumbent, nobody wants to talk to you. They might have talked to you before you announce, but once you announce, they typically don't talk to you because we protect incumbents, right? That's been, part of, the political way of thinking. But I'm really happy to say that I think my race was a bit different because people saw the real issues and how it impacted elections, how it impacted the office. That when I announced my candidacy for clerk, I actually announced with, I think it was nearly 24 sitting elected officials who were backing me right out the gate.
Wow.
And that's very rare.
Yeah, some people had some problems with your predecessor. She couldn't run.
Yeah.
She had problems running elections.
Yeah.
When the results, where you have to wait up till 3 a.m. to get the results, that's no good. So
Yeah,
stuff like that matters. Yeah.
it does.
It matters. And even if something, for example, because some things happen on election nights, right? A judge may have forgotten the memory stick and they lock it away, but they also lock the key in whatever container, right? It happens. But you have to communicate. You have to communicate to the public where you are, what's the issue, because if you don't communicate, then people fill in the void and they make their own assumption about what happened or what is happening, and then that becomes the narrative. And so we hit the ground running straight out the bat. My kickoff fundraiser in November of 21 was I think Dave, you were there. It was like over 70 people. We raised over $10,000 in that one event, and that just built the momentum. And
that's
February,
really good. That's really good because the county clerk, just like my wife's office, you're not a big policymaker that people are going to want to give money to, like maybe the state's attorney or someone in the legislature that they think they're going to get something out of that. You're just trying to do good governance. So it's harder to raise money.
That's a good point.
It is so hard to raise money when you're in these types of positions. That by February of 2022, and remember 2022, we had this weird summer primary in June. So we were collecting petitions in January, February. My opponent switched parties. She became a Republican, and she said that when it came to voting rights, the Republican Party aligned with her values. Okay, that's a statement in 2022 after the claims of rigged elections in 2020.
So she meant less voting rights aligned with her.
It was.
That's what I get from the Republican Party.
Yeah, it's an odd statement to make, right? And I think
especially proudly. Go ahead, sorry.
Yes, and I think for those, and up to that point, I had not seen my opponent in any political spaces or any Democratic spaces. I was doing my job, which was to win over the Democratic primary voters. But there were some that were like, "Hey, man, like, I get it. I guess there's issues in the office, but they are our Democratic incumbent." And I was actually told by an elected official, why is it that you young bucks can't wait your turn? And I said, my response to it was, because I believe I can do the job better. I think the people of the county deserve better. So they did not endorse until after I won, but that's okay. That's how it goes in politics, right? But hey, look, we had a really strong grassroots operation. I've never been a candidate. I had a strong core team of 4 people. 2 of them were in high school, and they were in high school, seniors, working full time on my campaign. They really kicked ass. I'm really proud of them. And at the end of the night, we knew that it may be a close race. And, my predecessor was the incumbent, really good ballot name. I was the newbie, so to speak, in terms of being from the voters actually deciding whether they were going to, cast their ballot for me. And we internally, we said if we win, we're going to win by 2 or 3 percentage points. It's not going to be a washout. It's going to be close. We ended up winning by 11%. So it was a really good resounding mandate, I think, for my first term. And so then we hit the ground running and we started improving our operation once I was sworn in. And let me tell you, from a fiscal standpoint, I was walking in already projected to be over budget based on the budget I inherited. I had a low employee morale problem. Nothing was really planned ahead. It was more let's go day by day. Let's just the wing it approach, which is not me in terms of running an office. And so we immediately started making 45 days to just kind of figure things out, figure out who the staff are. Let me just learn from them, and immediately recognize we have really talented people in the county clerk's office. We have talented people that have not been able to really show that talent to the public. And so it's about making these movements to let the staff who have historically, I think Holly and I both share really good tenure rates. And a lot of the staff have been there for 10 plus years. There's a lot of institutional knowledge. Yep. So it's just let's let the staff who know what they're doing, we got to guide them, but let them do their thing. They know how to run the office. They have good ideas, they just haven't been able to implement. And so we've really done some great things. We've increased the pay for election judges, which now I have a lot of election judges, whereas before we were always running short. We lobbied the county board to get $1.4 million in federal dollars to start improving our election infrastructure. We returned over $3 million to taxing bodies in my first 6 months. Wow. We started being in the community. People need to know what the county clerk's office does. They need to know our services. And we're meeting them where they're at, whether it's at a senior home, sharing resources to their seniors, whether it's at a resource fair in Waukegan or Lake Zurich, we're there, whether it's at the Lake County Fair, and my staff is going to be there, the entire Lake County Fair period. We're meeting them where they're at. We're doing more with less, but we're also working on improving elections every single step of the way. In this past April election, we finally accomplished what I've been wanting to accomplish since I stepped in, actually what I campaigned on, which is, on election day, voters should not be restricted to a polling place. They should be able to choose the voting location that works for them in their busy schedule. And so we were able to implement the vote center model in Lake County, and 15% of people voted outside of their neighborhood polling place because people have busy lives. They have work, they have kids, they have other family obligations. And if I can take that work out of their equation about I need to be in my neighborhood school or church by this time to vote, versus I can just hit a polling site on the way to picking up my kids or going to visit, mom at the senior facility.
And I have a question about that in a second here. But Dave, did you want to?
Oh, I have an interesting question. Maybe it's more of an ethical thing. You're running for re-election here in 2 years. You're in charge of the elections. How do you? No, it's a good question.
Greg.
How do you get the conflict?
It's a great question.
How is it that you go about ensuring a fair election when you're on the ballot? And how does that work?
That's a great question.
That is a really good question. Look,
that's a lawyer's question.
Yeah, yes.
That is a lawyer's question. Look, hold on, my dogs are now deciding that they want to wrestle in the dining room together. I am the type of clerk during any election that I will literally roll up my sleeves, help at a polling site. After the office, I'm done, or during the weekends, I'm there supporting our election staff and our election workers. I can't do that next year.
Okay,
As
so
a
there's like a
candidate,
systemic boundaries around your participation because you're running. Okay, okay.
so I can't do that. I can't show up to a polling site next year and be like, I am here to help when my name is on the ballot. That's just not going to happen. The judges may know why I'm there and that I'm there to support them. I'm going to know the work that I'm doing, and I feel I can do it impartially, but it is about the optics. You're going to have voters in the room voting. Some of them may know that I'm the county clerk. Some of them may know that I'm on the ballot. And so to remove those optics, I am going to have to be essentially sequestered in my office in Waukegan and not be as public facing next year during the election. And then I'm going to have to rely on my director of elections. I'm going to have to rely on my chief deputy to be so that everything is done adequately. I can give guidance from afar, but I won't be as present as in previous elections, just because optically a voter may have that
It looks
same
looks
question.
suspicious. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do know that. I know that it's with my wife this happens. I know this happens with Eric, the state attorney, too, is that it depends on what position you're showing up at an event. Are you there in your official capacity, or are you there is it a political event?
Campaign capacity, yeah.
And it's totally different what you can actually do.
It's interesting.
100%. And for example, if something were to happen at a polling site, let's say a car hits a light pole and now we have a polling site without power. That's a different, right? I can respond to that event in my official Lake County Clerk capacity. But if I'm running, toner for the on-demand ballot printing machines at a polling site, and I'm just going to say hey to everyone while I'm there, now you're going into that gray area because one, you're blurring the ethical line there. If now a candidate is allowed in the polling site, but you have to be a poll watcher and you have to be credentialed. I could just take credentials with me, but now I'm blurring the line in my political capacity. If something's happening and the election judges are asking me questions about how to respond.
Right.
Because that's one of those situations where I'm literally wearing two hats. Optically, I cannot wear two hats in that instance. I need to make a decision. I'm there as a candidate or I'm there as a county clerk.
Right. That's interesting. No, that was a great question. But my question was, is there any at least talk about getting like a Lake County election app for a phone where you can actually start voting from your phone? I mean, people send billions of dollars from their phone to a bank account or somebody else's account using encrypted, software. Like, why can't we do voting on our phones? That way you can do it from wherever you want.
Because it's not legal yet.
Is it specifically illegal?
We cannot have, so the way the Illinois election code is structured, it has to be a paper ballot.
Okay.
And it has to be issued by an election judge at the polling site, unless you request one to be sent to you via vote by mail. Widespread remote voting, I think we're now starting to have those conversations at the national level about the practicality of remote voting, because a lot of what we hear is exactly what you just said. We're able to conduct financial transactions. We're able to conduct medical transactions, right? Where you got HIPAA, you got everything else on the phone, and yet we're not able to conduct voting, on the phone. And I've actually had some constituents write to me that they would like to see that. We would need massive reform in our Illinois election code to be able to facilitate that. I think the bridge to that is there's actually we do a very basic remote voting because for those that aren't able to physically go to a polling site, for example, for ADA reasons or other reasons. But it's still not but that's just they get the PDF of their ballot online. They can print it off and they can still mark it and then they can send it back in. So that's very primitive. We're not fully there yet. I think we're going to need a lot more guidance from state and federal legislators on how to structure it to be able to protect them, still protect the integrity of the election and protect and make sure that the person who's actually eligible to vote is actually the one casting that ballot.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good. Yeah, exactly. I mean, somebody, could like while you're sleeping, uses your finger to put on the finger, that votes for you.
In Illinois, you could register to vote on the election day at the polls. Is that correct?
Yes, if you are not a registered voter, you can. We have same-day voter registration in Illinois. Illinois is very friendly to voters.
That's huge. That's huge. Yeah.
Michigan, for example, I learned this as I'm meeting with my other colleagues from across the country. Michigan did not have in-person early voting until the 2024 election. So Illinois, we're fairly developed in how we conduct elections. We have lots of options for voters.
I am finally proud to be an Illinoisian ever since Pritzker took office. I'm not even kidding. First, he legalized pot, which I love. And he's just done
gambling,
and he's buys pot, right? He's done all these like he's just such a good governor.
He might be our next president. You never know.
That would be awesome, but we'll see. I just had one more thing I wanted to ask about. David, did you have anything you wanted to ask about? Because I don't want to keep you too long. It's dinner time.
No, go ahead.
With all the the hysteria over voting fraud and rigged elections, 2020, Trump won, blah blah blah. Does any of that trickle down or present in the county-wide arena?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So I was actually sued in my official capacity after the presidential election in November. They wanted me to not certify the election for Lake County. Because of irregularities or what have
They're
you.
Such little babies, aren't they? Okay,
and they sued me actually in the State Board of Elections.
Yeah.
So which means that now I have the Illinois State, the Lake County State's attorney representing me in conjunction with the Illinois Attorney General's office. So by kind of looping us together, we had a really good defense, and I really enjoyed being in the courtroom where the judge was just pretty much this lawsuit is just completely baseless, and there's nothing even to respond because it wasn't even filed properly, which is even better. But we do have and this is where I've said this in Democratic spaces, and I might get in trouble, but it's okay.
This is kind of a Democratic space.
Yeah. But for my Democratic voters out there who are listening and watching right now, we cannot resort to claiming rigged elections simply because our candidate lost an election.
Really? You mean that's inappropriate?
That's what we're seeing now. There's this article in Substack saying that Elon Musk detailing how there's theory about how Elon Musk infiltrated some election equipments in key swing states. There's just the reaction that there's no way that Trump could have won. The reality is he did, and people have to remember this. One of the greatest strengths of our election system in the United States is that it's not centralized. We don't have one federal agency in charge of elections. It's up to the states. You have 50 different ways of conducting elections, and then every state is different. In Illinois, we're even further decentralized, where it's the county clerk. We're a bottom-up state. Some states, like Maine, have a Secretary of State that's in charge.
Well, that's because there's like 3 people in Maine, but yeah.
Right. So the whole idea that Donald Trump was duly elected by the people, some people think it's ridiculous. It's like, no, he was duly elected. He was duly elected. There were enough voters.
In the last
election, there was enough voters in these swing states that tilted the Electoral College in his favor. So we cannot claim election fraud when we lose. Ultimately, I think that this is a wider discussion. The party needs to really figure out what the hell it did that it went south. And I think there's a lot of different examples of where the party failed. And I say this as a delegate. I was a delegate to the Democratic National Convention for President Biden and then for Kamala Harris. And so I recognize in looking back, a few things that I wish, were done differently, but we cannot claim voter fraud simply because our candidate lost.
Right.
In Lake County, we've been hit with FOIAs regarding, they want voter information. We've had historically groups, election integrity groups that have kind of circulated around the Chicagoland region. I think that's going to continue. People, it doesn't help when you have a federal administration that's continuing to undermine the electoral process. And so that's what we're seeing now with the congressional bill that was introduced in Congress, the SAVE Act, the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, which would just bury my office in paperwork. It would make it impossible for us to do our job. And it's one of those self-fulfilling prophecy proposals where they're going to be saying they're not doing their job. Well, of course not, because you made it impossible to do our job.
That's the whole point. That's the whole point.
It's like a written filibuster.
Yep. And then we have the Trump executive order that's still being litigated on pretty much changing certain parts of the election. Vote by mail as being one of them. And I will say this, we've had different iterations of the National Voting Rights Act, and each one improved based on the last one. And for decades, we gave voters the benefit of the doubt. This administration is doing the complete opposite. It's now we're telling voters, you're not an eligible voter until you prove to us that you are a U.S. citizen, and then you're an eligible voter. That's a completely different. It's a completely different approach that I think will disenfranchise people. It will disenfranchise the old, the young, the marginalized, the Black, the Latino population. It will disenfranchise people. And so that's something.
You're referring to like a voter ID kind of situation.
Now, even more than that, it's like, for example, the SAVE Act requires documentary proof of citizenship whenever you're registering to vote or updating, your voter registration. The issue with that is millions of Americans don't have direct access to their birth certificate or a passport. You have a clear example of Georgia when Brian Kemp was the Secretary of State, consolidating these DMV locations, and it was government efficiency, right? We're consolidating less overhead. Well, what happens when you're in rural Georgia, or these DMV locations are being closed that are in predominantly Black areas? Right. You're reducing access to the birth certificate. They're going to have to drive farther, or they're going to have to. Hopefully, there's a process to request it via the U.S. Postal Service. But even then, you're leaving things up to chance. And I look at, and this is actually a really good example. May 7th of 2025 was when the Real ID went into effect, right? If you were flying and did not have a passport, you needed a Real ID. My office had an increase, and this is like, up to 50% increase on a monthly basis in birth records from people from across the country because they needed their birth certificate. Now, we processed all of them. My staff were busy. They kicked ass. They processed all of them. But imagine those requests going to an office that's understaffed, under-resourced, and they're not able to get to all of them.
Yeah, that would be a nightmare. That'd be awful. All right, interesting, very interesting. I think I want to have you back on because I have 1,000 more things to talk about, and I think we're kind of out of time. Dave, did you want to end it with anything?
No, you're doing a great job. So
thanks, Ben. Thanks,
really are. That's all I can say.
Okay, very cool. Anthony, let me text you maybe in a couple of days and have you back on again, because now the more you say, the more like ideas and questions I have about other things, which is good. It's a fruitful conversation.
More than happy to be
learning
on.
Stuff. What's that?
I said more than happy to be on.
Okay, cool, great. All right, well, thank you very much, Lake County Clerk Anthony Vega, and my guest co-host David Weinstein, for coming on Let's Talk Lake County. I am your host, David Rich. Till next time, keep talking. All right, hold on, guys. There's a delay, so don't incriminate yourself.